Okay, welcome to Kapitel Kuf Zayin, chapter 107. It's a long kapitel. There is 43 verses in this kapitel, so we're going to do it once. We're not going to go through it once and go through it again. We're going to go through it straight. There are a few lines at the top of the chapter says that this psalm speaks of those who are saved from four specific perilous situations: imprisonment, sickness, desert travel, and sea travel, and must thank Hashem. For their sins caused their troubles, and only by the kindness of Hashem were they saved. It is therefore appropriate that they praise Hashem and tell of their salvation to all. So that's a good introduction as to what's going on in this chapter. Arba tzrichim lahidus, as the Gemara says, there are four that have to thank Hashem. So he mentions the four different things. Till today, we still have this custom, this minhag. It's brought down in the Gemara. The Gemara, as I wrote in the email today, the Gemara bases it on these verses, right? There's no halacha in the Torah. There's no halacha that comes from the sages and the rabbis from in the Gemara that's not based on a verse in the Torah. So how do we know that these four are the ones that are supposed to praise and thank Hashem when they're saved? It is from this chapter of Tehillim. This is where the Gemara learns it from. So those who learned Gemara Brachas, we've done a class on Gemara Brachas in the past, right? So it actually mentions these are Batzrachim Laidis. So what are they? Traveling through the desert, right? So it's a dangerous place to travel through the desert. So if you traveled through the desert and you came out healthy on the other side, everything went okay, you have to thank Hashem. If a person for some reason was incarcerated, so that person, when he comes out, he has to thank Hashem. And we do it today with a bracha by the Torah. We do it today with a bracha by the Torah. It's called the bracha of Hagoimel. If someone's not well, especially if they were hospitalized or their life was in danger, a car accident or something like that. Again, in those cases, you're supposed to make this bracha of Hagoimel. And then traveling over an ocean, and when you get to dry land. So this is the most common today that people make this bracha of Hagoimel is when they travel over an ocean. So if you fly from here to Europe or if you're to Israel or something like that, so then we make this bracha of Hagoimel. That's the most common. The only other time that I made the bracha of Hagoimel in my life was after a serious car accident where the car was totaled and I walked out unscathed. So in that case, I might have said I should make the bracha of Hagoimel many years ago, more than 10 years ago. Yes, I made the bracha of Hagoimel at that point. So that's in all these cases, your life is being spared, your life is being saved. So therefore, we make the bracha of Hagoimel. Now, why make the bracha of Hagoimel? Why in these scenarios should you make a bracha? Should you thank Hashem? So the Radak says that we have to thank Hashem in order to recognize that everything comes from Hashem. The whole point of this whole chapter, and really the Radak says it as an introduction, but if you weave through the whole chapter, you'll recognize that every single idea here in this chapter is bringing out one idea. It's one thing, that Hashem is the one who runs the world, and therefore, if something goes good, it's thank Hashem. If something goes bad, it's coming from Hashem. You have to think about it, etc. So that is that's the point of this chapter, that everything comes from Hashem. This Farnu says that, and there's some other commentaries as well that say that this is talking about the time of Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, there's going to be four things that you're going to have to thank Hashem for, because these four things are scenarios that happened to the Jewish people during Galus, during exile. We went through the desert. We went overseas, right? We weren't well. We were incarcerated, etc. So these are things that happened to the Jewish people throughout Galus. So therefore, when Mashiach comes, we're going to say this chapter of Tehillim. That's some of the commentaries take it that way, and they learn it through the whole chapter, which we're not going to do particularly. The Mamlaya says, and if you see, at least in the Tehillim that I'm using over here, if you see, it says Sefer Chamishi, right? It's book 5. So the Tehillim is divided in a few different ways. There's 150 chapters. It's divided in 30 parts, which would be the way in Chabad we say a part every day of the month, right? So if there's 29 or 30 days, so we do one of the 30 parts every single day, and you finish within the month. And on day 20, if it's a month that there's only 29 days, so then on the last day, you do the 29:30. So again, divided into 150 chapters, divided into 30 for the month. It's also divided into 7. And if you look over here, it's also Yom Shishi. It's for Friday, right? So it's divided into 7 because there's some that have the custom. And I know some people that do this, that they say the whole Tehillim every week. That they say for Sunday, Monday, the way it's divided into 7. And then it's divided also into 5, like the 5 books of Moses. So the Tehillim is also divided into 5. And maybe a class for another time. There's a clear delineation in this style of every single one of the 5 books. They're all a little bit different, and they bring out different ideas. So the Mamleis, as an introduction to this chapter, says that this is the first chapter of the 5th and final book of Tehillim. And the whole 5th book of Tehillim, most of the concepts of the 5th book of Tehillim is praise of Hashem. Praise of Hashem in the time of Mashiach, but it's like saying it in present tense as if Mashiach has already come. So, but this whole idea of praise of Hashem is an ongoing theme for the next 48 chapters, right? No, 43 chapters. Yeah, 43 chapters. So yeah, the Yavid says that it's about thanking Hashem for going out of Galus, and if in our time in Galus, if in our regular life Hashem makes miracles, especially in these 4 categories that we're talking about, right? Going through a desert, coming out of incarceration, sick, traveling over the ocean. And Hashem does miracles in order to help us and to save us and to make sure that everything is okay. So Hashem will surely do the ultimate miracle of taking us out of Galus, taking us out of exile, and bringing us towards Mashiach. And with that, we'll start. It's a very famous pasuk, a famous verse. If you heard it before, praise to Hashem, for He is good. For His kindness is forever. The Yavid says that this pasuk is talking about a miracle that Hashem does for the public, because it's saying praise Hashem because everything is good, right? So it's something that is more of a public idea. And this praise is in the form of halal, of praising of Hashem, as opposed to the next pasuk, which we're going to get into, which is more on a personal level. The Meiri says that even when someone goes through trouble, he should recognize that everything comes from Hashem. So the Meiri says this over here. The Radak says it as a form of introduction to the chapter, that we should recognize that everything comes from Hashem. And if we if we think about every time something happens, positive or negative, but if we recognize that everything comes from Hashem, so what are you going to do when something happens? So you're going to daven to Hashem. If you're in a tight spot, you're going to daven to Hashem to help you out of tight spot. If you're in a good spot, you're going to thank Hashem. You're going to praise Hashem, right? So whatever happens, you're going to daven to Hashem, and that's the point of this chapter. That's the point of this pasuk. Haidul Hashem, praise to Hashem, because everything comes from Hashem. Now, the Yalkut, the Mamleis, he says that the pasuk is divided into 2. Haidul Hashem kitayv, give thanks to Hashem kitayv because He's good, and Kilaylam Chazdei, and forever is His chesed, is His kindness. And the Mamleis says that if you do the first part, you'll have the second part. If you're going to praise Hashem, if you're going to daven to Hashem, you're going to praise Hashem for everything that He gives you, so then the kindness won't stop. It won't be something that you just had once and that's it. It will go on forever. Chazdei, Hashem's kindness. Also mentioned in Mamleis that it says Lo'ilam Chazdei, that Hashem's kindness is forever. It's a euphemism for that it goes on and on and on, right? When someone does a kindness for another person, it could be that one day you'll repay his kindness, right? And you could be even. Yeah, someone walks by when you're unloading your car and he helps you unload your car. The next day you're walking by when he's unloading your car, you help him, or you give a friend a ride somewhere, and then another day he gives you a ride, or something else, right? There's many ways that when you do a kindness for somebody else, you can be paid back for the kindness. But Hashem, Lo'ilam Chazdei, Hashem's kindness is so great and so long and so everlasting that no matter what we do, we'll never be able to repay Hashem's kindness. Yoimru, Pasuk Beis number 2. Yemin Geulei Hashem. Those who were redeemed by Hashem, Asher Ge'olam Miyad Tzar. That Hashem has redeemed them from Tzar, which means from a tight spot. So the commentators say this is referring to when Hashem delivers, right? When Hashem saves, when Hashem saves a person. But it's interesting because it says Yemin Geulei Hashem. Asher Ga'olam, those who were redeemed by Hashem, specifically by Hashem. So the Mefarshim explain that it's specifically Hashem redeeming. We say this by the Pesach Seder, right? Lo Yalidei Malach, Lo Yalidei Saraf. That when Hashem came to redeem the Jewish people, it was Hashem by Himself. So here, what we're referring to is that Hashem is going to redeem the Jewish people when it comes to the time of Geula, when it comes to redemption. And since it's going to be Hashem redeeming the Jewish people, it will be a Geula she'ein acharei galus, a redemption that doesn't have a galus afterwards, an exile afterwards. It will be an eternal redemption. Pasuk Gimel number 3. Meiratzis Kiptzam, Hashem has gathered them from the lands, Mimizrach, Mimayrav, Mitzafen, Umiyam. That from the east and from the west and from the north, Umiyam, and from the sea. Right. So first we're talking about. Remember, we're talking about the Arba Tzirchim Leidos. We're talking about the 4 scenarios where a person has to thank Hashem. So what's the first one that he's talking about? He's going to start off talking about those who travel, and therefore they need to praise Hashem. And why travel first? Because those are the most common, right? The most common reason that a person would have to thank Hashem is because they have traveled. Radak says, why doesn't he mention south? If you look in the pasuk, right, he says east, west, and north. Why doesn't he mention south? So Radak mentions that the south is very hot, right? Compare if you look at the land of Israel, right, it's Israel, compared to the center of Israel or even the north of Israel and the south and the Negev, it's much more empty. It's hotter. It's a much harder place for a person to live. So he doesn't mention the south. He only mentions the more places that are inhabited. Pasuk Dalid number 4. Taru b'midbar b'yishimayin darech, that they erred, they lost their way in the desert, in the wilderness. Ir Moishav Leimatzo, and they can't find the scenario of a person that can't find a Ir Moishav, an inhabited city. So Rashi says a person traveling in the desert, what could happen? He can make a mistake. He has the wrong GPS, or the GPS signal gets jammed, or before GPS. But even if you rely on GPS, it's not always the best way, right? You have to recognize that everything comes from Hashem. Again, so a person can be traveling in the desert, make a wrong turn, go in the wrong direction, right? And won't find the proper place to go. The next pasuk says that he gets that when he makes a mistake, he won't have a place to eat, which we're going to get to in a moment, right? He won't have food to eat. The Yavet says that Toba Midbar, they make a mistake while traveling, and then Ir Moishav Lematzo, they don't find an inhabited city. The Yavet says that they have nobody else to look out for them. Imagine someone all alone in the desert, and there's nobody to look out, nobody that will help out, etc. So it's not just that they won't find a city that maybe they can find some food or direction, etc., but also nobody to share their troubles that they're to help them. Pasuk Vav number 6. So what happens? So what's the sorry. Oh, I missed a Radak in Pasuk Hey. So Pasuk Hey, let's go back. Pasuk 5, that they were thirsty and hungry, and they and their soul languished within them. So that's actually what the Yavet says, that they have nobody to share it with, meaning it's just them and their soul. They have nobody else to share it with. The Radak says that usually a person plans, he's going to go through the desert, right? What happens? You go for a trip today, right? You're going to take a flight, you take a train. You're going to be on the train or on the bus or in your car. You're not going to be there for 5 hours, right? I'm going to drive from here to New York, and it's going to take me 6.5 hours. So I know that I need X amount of food, right? What happens if I make a mistake along the way? So if I find a place that I could get a gas station, I could get something to eat, nuts or a drink. Fine, you're good, right? What if you're going through the desert and you were planning that it's going to take you 5 hours to get through the desert, or 5 days even, right? And you plan accordingly and you have enough food. But what happens if as the pasuk Dalet says, you make a mistake in the way. So pasuk Hey says, then you become hungry, right? Because you're not going to you planned, even if you brought a little bit of extra, but how much extra are you really going to have, right? So the mistake will create a scenario where the person won't have what to eat. So Vayitakel Hashem Batzarla in pasuk 6, they'll cry out to Hashem Batzarla because it's uncomfortable, it's a problem. And what happens? Hashem will deliver them from their affliction. From their affliction, Hashem will deliver them. In time, Mamlei says that in time of trouble, they have no other option. What are you going to do, right? In the middle of the desert, who are you going to cry out to? There's nobody to listen, right? As we mentioned in the previous pasuk, there's nobody around, no inhabited city, there's no other people around. So he's going to cry out to Hashem, and Hashem will surely come and help him find his way. As the pasuk 7 says, that Hashem will direct them onto a proper path, in order to go to a proper inhabited city, right? Hashem directs them to the right path. That's the end of pasuk 6. That it means that Hashem saves them from their affliction, and that's pasuk 7. How's He going to save them? He's going to direct them into the proper path to go to a proper city. The Radak says it's not that Hashem directs them to the proper path. Hashem makes them realize where they made their mistake. Right, where they made a mistake, so they could either go back or go forward, whatever it is, in order to get to a proper road and make go back to where they were planning on going. Since Hashem directs them, Rashi says, so pasuk 8 is Yoidu Hashem Chazdei v'nifleis. So they have to give thanks to Hashem. Yoidu from the word Taida, right, similar to the word Taida, thanking Hashem. Yoidu Hashem, thanking Hashem Chazdei for His kindness. And his great wonders and miracles that he does, livnei Adam, to humans, to the people, right? So what is that? That's obviously, as the Radak says, when they come to civilization, right? When they come to an inhabited city, so they talk about the miracles that Hashem did for them. How do they do that? How are they going to talk about the miracles that Hashem did for them? What did He say? What's the mitzvah over here? What's the obligation over here? They have to make up birchas hagoymel. They have to make the bracha of hagoymel chayavim tevah shigam alani tevah. Right? They have to make that bracha of thanking Hashem for the kindness that He has done for him. It's something that someone comes in from out of town, and we just had it here in Shul at the beginning of the week. Someone was in Europe for a week, so the first time he came back to Shul on Monday morning, it was Tikkun Seder. So he came Aliyah, and he made the special bracha of Hagaimel because he went over the ocean, thanking Hashem. But it's not just that he should thank Hashem on his own and say thank Hashem. It has to be done. As we're going to see later, based on a pasuk, that it has to be in front of a minyan. Pasuk number 9, Kisbiya nefesh shekeka v'nefesh eva milatayv, that Hashem satiated a thirsting soul and filled a hungry soul with toiv, with goodness. That as the Metzudah says, that He helped the thirsting soul when they made a mistake in the road, right? And when they were traveling through the desert and they made a mistake in the road, and filled with goodness. What is that? That is not only fixing the mistake, but also helping them come to civilization, to a proper city. Pasuk Yud. Now we're going on to the next one of the 4 categories, right? Pasuk 10 is those that are incarcerated. Those are incarcerated. So just as a little bit of an introduction over here, because over here the pasuk in the previous scenario of someone that's traveling through the desert, the pasuk doesn't mention, the psalmist doesn't mention anything negative about the person himself. The person was traveling, made a mistake in the road, cries out to Hashem. Hashem helps him find the proper road. Hey, thanks Hashem. Over here, all of a sudden, when he's going to talk about the person that's incarcerated, he's going to say, maybe he had to do tshuva, maybe there's a reason for it, etc., etc. So, so first of all, in general, when it comes to these things, even though the psalm is coming and telling someone how they should have their proper outlook in life, right? If someone something, and that's the real outlook, the real Jewish outlook that we're supposed to have is that if something negative happens to me, what am I supposed to say? Oh, maybe I need to do tshuva. Maybe I need to do something to become closer to Hashem. Maybe Hashem is trying to give me a hint of sorts that I should fix something in my ways in order to do better, to be better, etc. And that's the proper way of person. But chas v'shalom, we don't turn around and say, "Oh, Yankel, you know why you're suffering? You know why you're not well, or you know why you're incarcerated." Yeah, it's because you have to do tshuva. It's not unless you're their rabbi and they're asking you for their advice. Yeah, you have to tell it to them what it is. It's a good thing. It's a healthy thing to tell people to do tshuva in the right situation, etc. Especially if they're going to listen to you and they're going to get closer to Hashem because of it. Fantastic, right? But stam just to go around and tell people, "Oh, you're not doing so well in this way or that way," is because of this. So we leave it to the psalmist to tell us. He'll tell me, right? And we can take the message from there. But it's really a message that we're supposed to take to ourselves, not to give to others. And we don't preach to others. We preach to ourselves. If someone else is listening while I preach to myself, oh, Matay, that's a great thing. That's a real farbrengen, by the way. A real farbrengen, when you have a Hasidic mashpia, you have a sitting in farbrengen. So he always says, "I'm talking to myself. You want to listen in? You can listen in, right? I want to better myself, so I'm going to talk to myself." And that's the approach that we're going to take over here as well. Because over here on Pasuk 10, there are those that sit in darkness and the shadow of death, right? And they're bound, right? So they're incarcerated. The Radak says that it's interesting because all of a sudden over here, he's going to mention over here sins, right? But he only mentions sins when he talks about prison, incarceration, and by sickness. He doesn't mention it about the person that travels through the desert, and he doesn't mention it about the person who travels over the sea. Why is he does mention it by travels? He mentions it only by these two things, right? So he says, why? What's this? What's the seichel in it? So he says, it's very interesting. A person can travel through the desert and nothing will happen, right? A person can travel over the sea and nothing will happen, right? But no, if you're incarcerated, it's already bad, right? There's no good. There's no positive, unless a person is strong enough and powerful enough to find something positive and to grow from it spiritually. Then it's a beautiful thing. And also being sick, right? So positive in that, right? So since those who travel, technically everything could go well, right? So therefore he doesn't mention sins or iniquities at that point. That's the way that Radak explains it. Over here he talks about, he says, at the end of Pasuk 10, he says, Asire ani avarzel, bound with chains of iron, but ani, it says poor. So he says that it's talking about, the reason he mentions poor, the Alshich says, the reason why he mentions poor is because sometimes a poor person can be incarcerated and won't have the financial means to hire a proper lawyer, etc., etc. So it's referring to that kind of scenario. Pasuk Yud Aleph, number 11. So Kihimru Imre Kel, that they defied Hashem's words, Va'atzas Elyon Na'atzu, and the council of on high, the ideas, the Eitzah from above, Na'atzu, they didn't listen to. So Rashi says that troubles and calamities only come because a person doesn't listen. Hashem needs to give a little bit of a reminder, right? And that's where it comes from. The Radak says that it's referring to mitzvahs between man, and therefore, incarceration will happen if someone does something that he shouldn't do, and therefore the local authorities. Well, we're not talking about chas v'shalom, someone that was kidnapped and taken into a cellar. Some chas v'shalom, we're not talking about that. We're talking about someone did something wrong between man and his fellow, and he ends up in jail, right? So he has to do tshuva, he has to do the proper thing. The Alshich says that if they defied where Hashem says, they defied where Hashem says that you should choose life and don't choose all the pleasures and everything. Some of those go against the idea of life. So a person should choose to go in the way of goodness. Pasuk Yud Beis, number 12. That this person is humbled by the suffering, and he stumbles, and there's nobody there to help him. Right. So it's still talking about the person is incarcerated. Mamleya says that this is measure for measure, midah keneged midah, that they didn't accept the yoke of heaven, they didn't accept the yoke of Hashem, so they get punished by being humbled and this kind of suffering in this idea of incarceration. The Radak says that the hardships of prison will subjugate the heart. Why? As we mentioned in previous verses, that they were arrogant against and desecrated the word of Hashem. Right? And he ends off, Ve'ein Oizer, there's no one to help. What do you mean no one to help? Besides Hashem, obviously, right? So we go straight into the next pasuk, number 13. So it's the same, very similar. It's a zayin instead of a tzaddik, but we have 4 times the same verse, right? We had it in pasuk 6, now we have it in pasuk 14. In 13. That they cry out to Hashem and in their distress, and Hashem saves them from their affliction, meaning in this case from their incarceration. And this is again recognizing that Hashem runs the world and that everything comes from Hashem. And if you recognize that, so what happens when you are in a tight spot? You cry out to Hashem. And what happens right away? Pasuk 14, Yetziim mechayshech v'tzal maves u'meiser seminatik. Hashem takes them out of the darkness and the shadow of death from tzal maves, and takes off their shackles. Right? So the Mamlei says right after crying out to Hashem, Yetziim, Hashem takes them out right away. Pasuk 15, Tesvav, Yoidu Hashem Chazdai, so they have to give thanks to Hashem. Again, this is a similar pasuk like pasuk 5 that we had earlier, that you have to give thanks to Hashem, v'niflais of the Bnei Adam, and make sure that everybody, that all people recognize that Hashem does miracles and wonders for the people. So right away, you have to give praise to Hashem and have to tell others of the miracles that Hashem has done for them. It's interesting because in Pasuk 6, it says that they cry out to Hashem and Hashem saves them. And then it says, okay, and then Hashem takes them and puts them into the proper way, right? So over here also you have 13 that they cry out to Hashem. So Hashem takes them out of the darkness, and then Yoidu, and you should give thanks to Hashem. So the same process of Hashem delivering and then giving thanks, which is, what's the thanks? That is the bracha that we make at the Torah of Hagoyim Alachayovim Tevish Kamalani Tev. Pasuk 16. How does Hashem do this? Kishibar dalsis and chayshes v'richto bezel yedea. And even someone that's incarcerated and he is behind brass gates and iron bars, that's nothing for Hashem to take care of in order to save the person. Hashem unlocks locked doors, whether it's strong walls, it doesn't matter. All the commentaries talk about this idea that no matter where, no matter how powerful of a wall it might be, it's not a big deal. Hashem could break those. Pasuk 17. So now we're going into the next category. So we're talking about someone that gets sick. So Pasuk 17, so as you mentioned, also by sick, we talk about the idea that it comes about by a person because of their iniquities, because of something that they could have done that they shouldn't have done. So he says, but over here, in the period before, he doesn't call them foolish. Over here, he calls them foolish sinners. Right? Foolish sinners that get afflicted because of their sins, yisanu, they will suffer. So what's this idea? What's it talking about? So the Radak says he calls them foolish because when it comes to prison, so a person gets arrested, he goes to prison right away. There's no lead up to it. There could be a lead up, but usually it's not a lead up to it. But when a person gets sick, usually it's something that it's slowly. It happens slowly. And if it happens slowly, a person should have the wherewithal, should recognize, hold on a second, this is happening and it's happening slowly, meaning that they have the opportunity to tshuva and put the brakes on it, right? And that's before it gets really bad. So if it gets really bad, then that's why the pasuk calls him an avilim, the idea of foolish. The Mamleis, though, says, and this we could all relate to on one level or another, is that over here, when it comes to illness, we call them foolish. Why? Because most of the illnesses come because of things that we do to ourselves, right? Most of the illnesses come today, they talk about, most of them come because of the way we eat, the way how we breathe, what we breathe in, what we drink, lack of exercise, right? Meaning that we were commanded by Hashem to take care of ourselves, right? So to eat junk, to eat things that are not healthy for our bodies is a foolish way to go about it. So that's the way Imam Leah says that. It says "Evilim derech bisham," that when a person gets sick, not always, right? Sometimes it's not necessarily in their control, but often enough it's in their control, and it's because of foolish decisions that a person has made in their lifetime, and that's what brings them to these sicknesses. Pasuk Yud Ches, number 18. And this goes very well with the next pasuk, right? Kol oichel t'sayv nafsham, ve'yigiv charmavis. They just like any food, right? And it brings them to gates of death. Imagine anybody that eats any food. But the Radak actually translates it a little bit different, and he says that the person is so sick that kol oichel t'sayv nafsham, that any food will be disgusting to them. I don't know if you ever witnessed someone that's not feeling well and they eat something and they say, "Oh, this tastes terrible." Yesterday they ate it and they loved it. I don't know, chocolate or fruit, right? You could have a natural taste, natural. Yeah, that all of a sudden it has a bad taste and they can't can't eat it, right? And if they can't eat, a person that doesn't eat properly will bring them to the gates of death, right? David, I don't know if you remember when I started with the pemphigus, right? So if it was, I remember like when you can't eat, what are you gonna do, right? So yeah, it reminded me by this pasuk. I was at the doctor once, and I came back a week later, and I lost over 10 pounds in 1 week. And the doctor says, if I didn't know that, he would she knew that I wasn't able to eat at that point. So like, yeah, you would go straight to the emergency room. And Baruch Hashem is under control, and I can eat now. But that's what the pasuk's talking about. Someone that's so sick that can't eat, and it brings them to Shari Mavis, to the gates of death. Pasuk 19. So what is it? The doctors are not helping. The food he can't eat, right? So what's it? So what do you have to do? You cry out to Hashem, because ultimately Hashem is the one in control. Hashem is the one that will help. Hashem is the one that will bring salvation into Kaisem, Yeshiyim, and Hashem saves them from their affliction. Right? But sometimes, especially when it comes to things that we think that we could control, we think the doctors are going to be able to control. We think that this one, so we try all these things, and sometimes a person comes to a realization. No, it's only the Eibishter, right? Yeah, Hashem has many ways to help you get better, right? You might use, I was speaking to someone the other day, and not well, and I said, he was going for treatment, so I said, my bracha to you is that the doctor should be the right shliach, should be the right messenger from Hashem to bring healing to you, right? Because ultimately, as much as the doctors are doing a wonderful job, ultimately you need that they should be divinely inspired to be able to heal the person, because ultimately everything comes, not ultimately, always, everything comes from Hashem. So what happens? Pasuk 20. Yishlach dvarei v'yirpayim. He sends his word, his word v'yirpayim, and he heals them. V'yimalet mishchisaisam, and he delivers them from shachas, which is the deaths, or he translates over here the grave. The Radak says that Hashem's healing comes through His word, which is His will, right? We know that with creation, Hashem also used words, right? So unlike the doctors, how does the doctor's healing come? He gives them medication, he tries this, right? But Hashem comes through His will and through His word, and He saves them from the depths. The Mamleah says Hashem's healings is better than a doctor's healings because there's no side effects. You take. I was on prednisone for a long time. A tremendous amount of side effects for something like prednisone, right? It helped tremendously. It's a miracle drug. It's an amazing thing, but it has side effects. If Hashem decided to heal, there's no side effects. The Alter Rebbe brings this pasuk. And he learns from the pasuk on a mystical level that sometimes a person has spiritual malaise, right? Feels distant spiritually. So what should help? Yishlach dvarei. Dvarei means the words. What's words? Davening, right? Sometimes you just need to sit down and daven and think about Hashem, and that will help you in your spiritual malaise. Pasuk Chaf Aleph, number 21. So after Hashem sends healing, Yoidu Hashem Chazdei, you have to give thanks to Hashem, and in Adam, make sure that everybody knows about the miracles that Hashem has given. So it's interesting because over here he mentions all of them mentions in the Niflaisel Bnei Adam that the other people will recognize Hashem's wonders. So here specifically, the people that were sitting around, someone that's on their deathbed, you can imagine you're in the hospital and you're sitting with someone on deathbed, and then they come back to life, so to speak, right? And you get a second lease on life. Those people recognize it much more because they witnessed it. So that's Niflaisel Bnei Adam, that the people should recognize Hashem's wonders. Pasuk 22, and they should bring a Thanksgiving sacrifice, and talk about the story with great joy. Right? So after the miracle that Hashem does for someone, he's supposed to bring a carbon taida. Thanks. There's one of the sacrifices you were able to bring in the temple was called a carbon taida, a sacrifice of thanks to Hashem. Thanks to Hashem in honor of this miracle. It's mentioned by the sick because that's the most common that a person would decide, saying like, oh, I was sick and look, Hashem saved me, and therefore I'm going to bring a carbon when I get better. He also has a lot more time to think about it, right? When someone's traveling by sea and all of a sudden there's big waves and Hashem saves him, right? Okay, so but he was always busy. He's like and nervous, right? Someone's traveling through the desert, or someone that's incarcerated. So they're preoccupied and overwhelmed. Someone that's not well has a lot of time to think. And it's most common for someone like that Adak says, for a sick person to make a lot of promises, so to speak, when he's not well, right? When I get better, if I get better, if Hashem saves me from this, etc., etc. So I'm going to bring this sacrifice, this carbon. So therefore it mentions, mentions specifically the sacrifice, carbon taida over here, by the sick person, because he has a lot of time to think about it, that when he gets better, he's going to bring a carbon. But ultimately,
now we say Gomer.
yeah. The Mamleya says that ultimately that the Sapru Maisa Berina, the end of Pasuk 22, that they're going to recount Hashem's deeds with joy, Berina, with joy, with singing and joy. This idea of talking about it is to recount how Hashem did a miracle. It's not the doctors that did a miracle. It's Hashem did a miracle. There's many stories throughout, even more recent, where doctors are stumped on something. And what is it? It's Hashem doing His job. Pasuk Chav Gimel, number 23. So now we're going on to the next, right? And we mentioned already 3, so we're on to the 4th scenario of danger. This is about traveling over the sea. The people that travel over the sea in ships, right? And it's a hard task, and perform the tasks in mighty waters, right? So that says when perform tasks in mighty waters, being on a ship and organizing it's a big job. I once went with someone over here, went sailing. What a job! And he's telling me, pull this and go here. And first of all, you have to be strong physically. You're standing outside straight in the heat, and even then, there's no, the things could go this way, go that way, and you have to be very careful. It's a hard job. So that's what he says. Someone that, and especially if you're going to travel overseas and there's going to be big waves and there's going to be a storm or something like that. So even more so. Pasuk 24 Chavdalit. Those people that travel on the sea, they see Maaseh Hashem, the work of Hashem, and the wonders in the deep. So what is this referring to? What do and the sick person doesn't see the wonders of Hashem. The person in jail and incarcerated doesn't see the wonders of Hashem. So the Radak says that it's taka wonders. If you look at the ocean, or if you look at the fish, if you look at the life that's going on under the ocean, right? So this is a beautiful thing. So the person already on the ship is already recognizing the beauty and the miracles of what Hashem has done. Besides the fact that if there's a storm, Hashem will save him, right? But even before that, he's already recognizing the beauty, the things of Hashem. The Mamleis though brings out, it says, Heimaro, they saw. Why does it mean they saw? Who's they? Who's they? right? So he says David Melech is writing this chapter of Tehillim, and David Melech is saying that there's a tradition that the Arizal, it's said in the name of the Arizal that David Melech never went on the ocean, he never went on a ship. He was always in Eretz Yisrael. He never went on a ship. So that's why he says they see, because he never witnessed the miracles that happen on a sea or what happens below the sea. So that's why he says hey maro they see. Pasuk 25. And with Hashem's word, Vayomer, and he spoke, and it caused a stormy wind to rise, and it lifted up the waves. Right? That's Pasuk 25. Even though a person could start traveling and go into the ocean when it's very calm and there's no waves, right? It's quiet. But then when Hashem says Vayomer, and he says, then all of a sudden, this is what's going to happen. Pasuk 26, Yalu Shmayim Yerutaimis, Nafsham Bara Tismaigog, that they rise up to the sky and they plunge to the depths and the soul melts in distress. I was talking to Chana about this pasuk because it reminded us. I went only once in my lifetime on a cruise, and I was with my wife. And the last night of the cruise, there was a big nor'easter that happened over here, more in the northeast. But there was some sort of wind still down south where we were. And the whole night, it was a big cruise ship. And the whole night, the ship it was massive winds and waves. The ship would go up on a wave and then crash down. You would hear it smack down on the water. And every time we were in bed, every time we would go up, and then as it would go down, you'd like sink into the mattress, like very, very, in the morning, we were, I don't know, the 8th, the 9th floor, maybe even higher. We were, I think, 6 stories from sea level, and our window was covered in sea salt. So the splashing was coming all the way 6 stories high. That's how high the water was splashing. I can't even imagine. It was middle of the night, so we didn't see it, but we saw the next morning and how crazy it was. But this pasuk, that's what it says. Yalu Shemayim, you're going to lift up to heaven, right? So when you go up on a wave, and you're the timus, and then you fall back down, right? So that's what happens to a ship. And what happens? You get nervous. You get that's anxiety-inducing. That's what the pasuk says, right? Nafsham beratis maiga. You feel there's a distress. You become anxious. You become anxious from this. Pasuk 27, you're going to be thrown around like a drunkard, right? The ship gets thrown around like a drunkard. And all their genius, all their skill, all their chachma, they know how to ride a ship from this and from that, but all of a sudden, because it doesn't, all their chachma, all the wisdom that they learned and understood and how to direct the ship, all of a sudden is valueless. They can't do anything. Pasuk 28, so they cry out to Hashem, and Hashem saves them. Right? That's Pasuk 28. Either that Hashem should save them from the waves, or it's different ways the commentaries learn it. Either that Hashem should quiet down the waves, or bring them to dry land. But either way, Hashem figures out a way to save them. In Pasuk 29, Yakim Sa'ara Lidmama V'yechshug Aleim, there's also the idea of bringing back stillness and quietness, and that the storm should pass, and that the waves quiet down. The storm that Hashem created now goes back to not being a storm that Hashem created. Right. Pasuk 30, Lamed. Vayismechu ki yishtayku, and they get joyful. Ki yishtayku, because it became quiet. Vayanchem el mechayis cheftzam, and they are led. Hashem leads them to their destination where they wanted to go. Right? The people on the ship become joyful. The waves quieted down, and Hashem directs them to where they wanted to go. Pasuk Lamed Aleph 31. So Yaidu Hashem Chazdai in this 4th category as well. Yoidu Hashem Chazai, give thanks to Hashem for his kindness and v'nifloisav, and about his wonders and miracles of Nei Adam for the people. The Ralak says that when they get to the desired place, you should give thanks, right? Once you get to your destination, you should give thanks to Hashem. But how do you give thanks? So this, the Gemara in Gemara Brachas learns from Pasuk 32, that you have to do it. You have to exalt Hashem. What's a call? Kahal is a congregation. What's a congregation? Is at least a minyan. You have to make the bracha of a goimel. You have to do it with a minyan. And it also should be an assembly of elders. What does it mean, assembly of elders? What does it mean, assembly of elders? There has to be scholars. It has to be Torah scholars. So actually, the halacha, the Gemara over there in Gemara Brachas, when it talks about it, and La halacha, it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, that when you make the bracha of Hagoimel, you have to have at least a minyan, and there has to be at least, part of the minyan has to be at least two scholars. Because it says scholars in plural, so it has to be at least two scholars. That's the halacha. Now, it's not ma'akiv, as we say in halacha. It doesn't hold back, meaning if you have a minyan and there's no scholars, you still make the bracha of Hagoimel. But ideally, there should be 10 and at least 10, and within that minyan at least two scholars. Pasuk 33. Yasim naharis lamidbar mitzoi mayim litzimayim. So now over here, until now we were talking. So by the way, we're finished talking about the four. About Tehillim like this, we're done. We talked about the four. Each one ends off with the fact that they give thanks to Hashem, and then after all four, it says that thanks should be specifically with a call, so it means that it should be done in a minyan, etc. Okay, so now we're done with the page, chapter with verse 32. We finished this idea, but we continue now. We continue now, and we talk about other scenarios where Hashem is in control. Because the whole point of this whole chapter is talking about how Hashem runs the world. Whether we go and we deal with a hard time, or if it's a good time, everything comes from Hashem. So he's going to give other scenarios where Hashem runs the show. Yasim Naharis Lamidwar. Sometimes there could be pasuk 33, right? There could be a river, and it could turn into a desert. And a place that's full of water, and it could become parched land, right? Hashem is in control. So before we talked about salvation and miracles, now he's talking about scenarios where good could be turned into bad, or at least the way we see it. The whole point, as the Radak mentions over here, the whole point is to talk about the fact that Hashem, that everything comes from Hashem, and everything is done by Hashem's will. Pasuk 34. Also at its pre, limlecha could be a land of fruit. Limlecha, it could become a salt marsh, right, where no fruit can grow. Meiras yoshveva, because of the evil that could go on over there. Meaning that whenever Hashem does something like this, it's not for no reason. Hashem has a reason, and if it's because of the evildoers and the evil of the locals, that's why it happens. So that's what we have to be careful about. Pasuk 35, Yasem Midbar Lagamayim. But on the other hand, if someone does good, as the Radak says, so he could take a desolate desert, midbar, a desert, and lagamayim, it can make it into water. Beretzia, in a parched land, l'maitzayim, to have water. When I was learning this pasuk, I was thinking about the modern day in Eretz Yisrael, right? He took a land that for thousands of years, not hundreds of years, thousands of years, that it was a desolate land. Why? Because it's a very hard place for agriculture to flourish. But when Hashem wants, even a desert can grow a crop, right? Can sprout it could sprout produce, and that's a tremendous bracha. Pasuk 36, that Hashem will move over hungry people from other places, or even people that live in cities or in places where there isn't. So he'll move them into places where there's an abundant amount of food, into a better place for them, right? Hashem orchestrates all of this, that the place should have everything, and a person shouldn't be missing anything that they need. If Hashem wants it, it's going to be this way. If Hashem wants it the other way, it's going to be the other way. Pasuk 37, and in these lands, they were helped. They were helped by Hashem, just like we talked about how the four categories are helped by Hashem. So also in this case, they're helped by Hashem, and when they plant, it sprouts forth produce. Pasuk Lamed Ches number 38. Vayevarchem vayirbu miyod, and they were blessed. So the Radak says the blessing over here is referring to financial success. Vayirbu miyod, and they multiplied tremendously. That's with children, and and there was no miscarriages. The literal translation is their cattle didn't decrease, and it's more of a financial thing. But the Radak translates it as miscarriage. Pasuk Lamed Tes number 39. Vayamatu vayaseichu. But in a case when Hashem wants, and obviously based on their transgressions, as the Radak says, so then they diminished and they were oppressed. They were diminished and oppressed. So that's the way that Radak learns it, that in the case of sinners or evil people, so that's what the pasuk is referring to. Hamlais learns it a little bit differently. He says that it's really going back, saying that all the help that we talked about in the previous few chapters, this is a prelude to that. That before that they needed help, and now and so because they were oppressed, etc. And that's pasuk 39. And then going back to the previous pasukim where Hashem has helped them out. Pasuk Mem number 40. Sheifech buz al nedivim. He pours contempt on the distinguished, on the divim, when the wealthy and the dignitaries, they can't come up with a proper path forward, right? And everybody comes to them and says, no, what do you have to say? Why when we try to plant over here, it's not working? And say, oh yeah, based on it, and whatever all their ideas don't work. So what does it do? It puts contempt on those nedivim, right? Because they think that it's coming through their knowledge and their understanding. But we have to recognize that it all comes from Hashem and a blessing from Hashem. Pasuk 41. And he raises the Evyan, the poor or the needy, from distress, and makes their families grow. So the Radak says that Hashem humiliates the rich and helps the poor. And the end of the pasuk is we're talking about about the numerous, the families numerous. It's talking about having many children. Pasuk Mem Beis number 42. Yiru Yesharim V'Yismachu. Those upright should watch and be excited, be happy, be joyful. V'chol avla kafza pia, and all the wicked will close their mouth. Right, the upright, the Yesharim, the upright, they'll see the goodness that Hashem gives to the poor and to the destitute and to those who need, and it will bring to them tremendous joy. And the final pasuk Mem Gimel, number 43, Michacham, who's a smart guy, who's a smart one, a wise one, the Yishmar Eila, and will keep in mind these things, and meditate Chazdei Hashem, Hashem's kindness. Smart person, as the Radak says, smart person will keep this chapter close to his heart. Keep it close, recognize that everything is in Hashem's hands. It's not what I do and how I do. Hashem wants me to do what I need to do, but ultimately it's all in Hashem's hands. And Leah says, who's smart will keep this close and will wait with patience. And he'll see at the end how everything it comes from Hashem. Not only that everything comes from Hashem, but everything that comes from Hashem is good. So everything that comes from Hashem and everything is good. With that, we finish. Kapitel Kuf Zayin, chapter 107.
It's a chapter.